Good evening, everyone. I'm Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. Before we begin, just a quick reminder that we're filming tonight's event, so could you switch your phones to silent? We're also live streaming over the RSA website, so welcome to our online viewers. And if you want to get involved in the discussion using your silent mobile device on Twitter, you can use the hashtag RSA Architect. Now, housekeeping notice is over. I'm pleased to introduce this evening's special event, which is part of the RSA Blossom series focusing on architecture and society. The lecture series was endowed in 1954 by architect and politician Lord Alfred Blossom, and I'd like to welcome members of the Blossom family attending this evening and offer kind thanks on behalf of the RSA for their continued support for these events. We do hope you can stay on for a drinks reception after the lecture, kindly supported by the Blossom family. Now, I'm delighted to welcome this evening's guest speaker, Sarah Wigglesworth. Sarah heads her own architectural practice in London and is an esteemed member of the RSA's faculty of Royal Designers for Industry. With a belief that good design in all its aspects can improve life, her practice works in close collaboration with clients and stakeholder groups to explore sustainable futures. Sarah is also Professor of Architecture at the University of Sheffield, where she's a pioneer of practice-based research. Sarah is currently leading a research project designing exemplary environments for older people. In her lecture this evening, Sarah will talk about the broader forces that shape our cities and argue for an architecture in which people will have greater control of the built environment around them. I'll be joining Sarah for the discussion after her presentation, and we're looking forward then to hearing your questions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sarah Wigglesworth.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak tonight to both the RSA and the Blossom family who have sponsored this lecture. Okay. Architects spend a lot of time feeling undervalued, pondering why we work the longest hours of any profession, and yet our wages are falling relative to others. And people don't trust us. We endlessly self-reflect on our irrelevance and impotence in the world of construction. I know because I do it too. Basically, we scapegoat our internal culture, our clients, project managers, our professional body, architectural education, anything we can, in vain hope that an adjustment within architecture itself can make things better. I believe this will not achieve anything. There seems to be little doubt that architecture needs to find a new valorization for itself within society, but I'm going to argue that its relevance will come from architects looking outwards and making a new contract with society. To do this, we need to find a new confidence and a new role, answering to genuine need in the interests of civic society and in the process becoming re-politicized in the sense of working for people. At the same time, and in the face of increasing levels of regulation and the pull towards technocratic problem solving, it is essential to remember the poetry of architecture that can make the settings of our daily lives evocative and pleasurable. Actually, I don't see these two things as incompatible. Everyone deserves a good environment to live in, just as we expect good health and clean drinking water. What is more, with the prevailing desire for economy and better value, this is the moment to be seeking resilient propositions that will be cherished into the future. In his 1923 book, Towards a New Architecture, Le Corbusier made a link between architecture and society, warning that if we did not sort out the problems of the traditional city, we would have a revolution on our hands. Corb's ideas were both technocratic and, in my opinion, elitist, making unfounded claims for the power of the built environment, and naively adopted by authorities in the shake-up after the Second World War. Top-down approaches fail to understand the complex emotional, social, cultural, historical, technical, administrative, managerial, and economic imperatives that make cities work. In the current era, and in the wake of these failures, I would like to think that we understand the connections between society and architecture in a more subtle way. And while architects cannot be held wholly responsible for the problems that result from our work, we certainly cannot claim to be unimplicated. But if we don't have anything to say about these things, then we will have little of anything important to say. So notwithstanding a perception that architecture's sole purpose is design, and that design is marginal to the key decisions in building, which are to say land values, land availability, lending, finance, and so forth, this has fueled architects' inability to influence the solutions that are on offer. But interestingly, what design does and can do is absolutely crucial. Good design helps life run more efficiently, and it understands functionality. So think of things like tube maps, trains running on time, IT systems working properly, BT line that doesn't get crossed. All these things are designed. Moreover, many aspects of design are highly rigorous, logical, and involve many, many hours of patient work. So I'm not talking about the kind of crazy person who just comes up impetuously with design ideas. If we get it wrong, the stakes can be really high. And at its best, design can promote well-being, happiness, and delight, all of which make people feel better, learn more effectively, be more productive at work, feel in control, and stay balanced and healthy. It reflects back at us the way we think about ourselves and what we value. There is, though, a much more powerful process behind design, and that one is, and it's frequently thwarted in the desire in building to limit risk, control processes, and guarantee outcomes. Design works across boundaries, synthesizing information from a wide range of sources, analyzing it, prioritizing it, and bringing it together to propose an original insights that comments on and adds another layer to history, identity, ecology of place. It posits a fresh insight and a different way of seeing. In doing this, it creates new narratives around its context, establishing relationships and revelations that convey deep meanings and resonances. By its nature, it aims to be scavenging, disrespecting convention, in other words, disobedient. While these aspects are anecdotally well understood by architects, it is a challenge to produce quantitative evidence of that good design pays, as if there were a direct line between cause and effect. For architecture is the sole art form in which the artist actually relinquishes control to others. Its greatest gift is to behave neither as a tool nor a mechanism, nor as a look, don't touch object of reverence, but to invite creative responses, allowing people to explore its potential and to find empowerment by doing so. It should invite creative occupation. By making users the co-creators of work of architecture, we hand back power to its occupants, giving environments life, meaning, and relevance both in the here and now and in the future. Architects cannot predict what will happen, but the architecture must be loose enough to permit such creative action while anticipating clearly where the dangers may occur. Ultimately, good architecture is about people. It is about the relationships established in bringing it about and the ones that arise once it is constructed. Architecture needs to strive to strike a balance between being quietly provocative backdrop to everyday life while also being resonant and relevant to the people that use it, dignifying their existence and respecting their values. We can only provide this by involving people in the dialogue, through participation in briefing, design, planning, and feedback associated with each project. Common, generic appointment and procurement procedures often work against this. So architects must step forward into the public stage to state how this process can happen. It means influencing all the other bits of the process by which buildings come about, enabling clients to work out what they want from the project, to develop briefs that balance communities' and landowners' interests, to influence procurement processes to better reflect the goals of the project, to engage the planning system in a narrative about quality and the idiosyncrasies of place, and to find the things people didn't know they wanted or needed in this new environment. This project illustrates some strategies we've used to try and overcome some of these barriers. In this example, for the design of a primary school, the local authority commissioned and paid for the building, but the school was heavily influenced the design. The procurement was run as a contractor-led design competition, which is to say, we're employed by the contractor to work for the local authority with the school. In the 8-week competition period, we were given 2 one-hour slots to engage with the school. That's all. We had to find engagement strategies that would tease out the brief and help us to find an effective design proposition. But as time was critical, we needed a swift and effective solution. Our proposition was a board game, which we invited the client and the user to play with, consisting of a site plan and some props, as well as counters representing the rooms involved. We asked the group to configure their favourite arrangement of spaces, both interior and exterior, to help us understand what their priorities were in the design process. This helped us quickly to understand key hierarchies, adjacencies, and relationships, and how the school's teaching ethos is reflected in the planning of the school. It allowed us to organise the plan in an effective way that made the school unique and tailored to their precise needs. We also worked with the children. We made a model so they could explore the school and comment on the layout of the buildings. We talked to them about their daily rituals, where they go, at what time, what sorts of things they do, and where they'd like to learn when they do them. In this manner, we were able to develop the idea of the classroom cluster, organised around an outdoor learning environment like this one, themed as a water garden. We also used this event as an opportunity to discuss their interest and capability in making their school a green building. We make use of simple, unthreatening imagery to engage people in the debate because frequently they can't understand architectural drawings, and it's really important to engage in a dialogue with them. So the hierarchy of the school that emerged was one where the library lay at the heart, at the hub of the circulation routes around the campus, and the classrooms were organised around these courtyards, all of them themed with different landscapes. In this library hub, pupils and teachers do their prep side by side so they can see cause and effect happening. As the children grow, they can see their teachers doing the same kinds of things. We designed a small mezzanine gallery with a very low ceiling above it so that kids could go up there, lie on a rug, and read a book that they'd chosen from the library below. That led to a deck which looks back over one of the courtyards that is at the entrance to the school. Well, a lot of money can be at stake when buildings go wrong, so it's quite surprising that we don't find much more commitment to discovering whether a piece of architecture actually fulfills its intentions. Typically, those that pay the capital cost and appoint the consultants are not the people that occupy and manage the building on its completion. And while we're desperately short of tangible evidence supporting how to get it right, the work that has been done, such as that carried out by CABE, is often ignored or worse, dismissed as hangovers from the boom era that do not fit the current ideology. This is compounded by an understandable reluctance to declare the problems that ensue from mistakes that are made, wherever they may lie. We need an honest sharing of detailed information that recognises the many contributory components supporting a building's success so that we can feed this back into future projects. But good design can achieve an architecture which is grounded in a meaningful dialogue based on people's lives and that responds to the real conditions and the contingent problems we face as society. By raising issues consciously and systematically and exploring their implications, design can add to the body of knowledge of successful situations and that go on to form in future practice. I believe that research can help us achieve this, but it does require a huge commitment from practitioners, from academia, from funding bodies, and from those financing and commissioning buildings. However, as the impact of rigorous research becomes an increasingly important metric, particularly in academia, so studies should be a cornerstone of what is produced inside it and through collaboration with industry. The prevailing separation of these two spheres, that's to say academia and practice, certainly is one of the barriers to making this work. Having made the case for more research into the built environment, I'm trying to fulfill this commitment by leading a research project at the University of Sheffield under the banner Design for Wellbeing, Ageing and Mobility in the Built Environment. This project uses design research based on engagement with older people themselves to develop exemplary prototypes for dwellings and neighbourhoods in Sheffield suited to the needs of our growing older population. Our project's called Dwell, Designing for Wellbeing in Environments for Later Life, and it builds on existing knowledge to develop an actual design proposal. While undoubtedly a growing sector in housing, older people's housing options are focused on choice for those that have money to buy a retirement lifestyle. But for those that have limited choice, they need to make do with potentially unsuitable options that are selected because the alternatives are actually very much worse. Our aim has been to consider interconnected issues that need to cohere to work properly for older people. This is why our research extends into neighbourhoods, looking at access to shops, services, and a cultural life that addresses the needs of older people who, like all of us, have a range of interests, needs, and desires. A key plank in our process is a partnership with Sheffield City Council, who are keen to learn how to deliver more services more economically and more efficiently, all the things that design can assist in facilitating. Older people's motivations for moving are very complex and diverse, involving push and pull factors. In a recent visit to an assisted living housing scheme, we found many poor design features. Residents told us that pressurized selling by the developer, not being able to view the property, and the stress of the move into the unknown all contributed to a climate of panic and poor decision-making. But these apartments were provided by a very successful national developer of purpose-designed homes for older people that has an 80% share in the market in the UK. They really should have done a better job. For those that have little money and rely on the state to take care of them, options are limited and linked to the care budget provided by local authorities. So the question remains, what are appropriate models? Should we aim to keep older people in their homes and communities struggling to cope, making adaptations to existing stock, while more general needs housing is built that answers to lifetime needs? Or should we build specialist housing that provides on-site the help that will almost certainly be required at some point? We will be testing these solutions with older people recruited especially for the project. We are at a unique moment in time wherein the generation coming up to retirement will have salary-related pensions and own properties whose capital can be realised in making provision for retirement. But this moment will not last long as pressure bears on their capital assets. We need resilient solutions that help promote older people's independence, mobility, confidence, well-being, feeling purposeful and connected to people, culture, debate, families, and young people. We need to create models of neighbourhoods that avoid ghettos, institutionalisation, and the erasure of older people's presence from the city. It is important to address a range of models for all situations, be they rural or city centre, as this one in Groningen in Holland. So one project we are working on proposes a model of older people's housing on the coast. On a site just south of Dawlish in Devon, we're designing a scheme of 35 dwellings for people aged 55 plus. These are intended for people downsizing from family homes. They will have a lifetime of possessions. They will have established hobbies and interests. They will have family. We have spent a lot of time thinking about how to accommodate favourite pieces of furniture, how to arrange the accommodation so that different views and light conditions form a backdrop to their daily routines. And also how to maintain existing interests while also offering a place where this community can come together around shared activities. We see the landscape as a key factor in enabling the character of the place and assisting this new identity. So the old walled kitchen garden with its ancient apple trees, shown ringed here, will be replenished with new varietals set amongst the Muse houses. These have private open space and sea views from living rooms. The inland houses are united with the centrepiece apartments by connecting strips of landscape. These host garden sheds for shared tools, barbecue pits, vegetable beds, spaces to sit and read or eat and drink, as well as a few parking spaces, all crisscrossed by connecting paths. We would like that chance encounters help people get to know each other and that this common ground will become a site of shared experience and exchange. There is a lounge area and a guest suite on the ground floor. That's the bit with the tall windows at the bottom. But we see this is only the first step in answering the desire for community of those living there. This is a potential locus for bird watching, coast walking, swimming, beach combing, sky gazing, even art, sport, rock collecting. The list goes on and on. And under planning policy, one of the buildings even offers someone energetic, the opportunity to build their own dwelling. So we're working with a very experienced client and with a well-researched and nuanced understanding of its customer base. But this is still a speculative development, so we are working with somewhat generic knowledge about user preferences, and the project's success will undoubtedly lie in the management arrangements that underpin the ongoing management of buildings once constructed, which is carried out by the company through a not-for-profit arm. It is possible to do this in a relatively small scheme such as this, but it is far more difficult to do it at the scale of a neighbourhood or even a city. And yet it is arguable that the curation of the city is what will help maintain an attractive, active and viable in the future. And while there are obvious aspects of this which we will need to outsource, such as rubbish collection perhaps, or sewerage and transport systems, there are other aspects for which we all need to ensure our voice is heard. The pedestrian-friendly street, the greening of the city, safe cycleways, beauty, quality. We all need to contribute our ideas and energy to these issues. Traditionally, the UK's housing has been provided by these top-down approaches, relying on shared expectations, generalised assumptions about the way we want to live. To ensure minimal standards, housing is highly circumscribed by regulation and guidance of all kinds, so the models that are often formulaic and conservative. And in the UK housing market, we base our expectations of size and value on numbers of rooms rather than area, on cupboard space, and bling kitchens rather than on well-planned, well-distributed, usable space. In valuing a property, surveyors use existing building stock as a benchmark, meaning innovation attracts little value. Funding models also assume a predefined product and leave little room or time to consider any alternatives. So if you are someone looking for something a bit different, or you'd like a shell in which to create a world of your own, you're going to find it pretty hard. And yet there are people crying out for different ways to be creative about how they live. We need to design specialist housing that accommodates difference, households occupied by 1.5 people, multi-generational housing, housing for young people, houses for those that want to live communally. Recently, our practice has been interested in forms of housing which are future-proofed through their ability to adapt and to change over time. So this is one of several examples, and shows a plot with a major and a minor house at either end. The plot's 5 metres wide, very typical, and 18 metres long. In these little diagrams 1 to 6, ground, first and second floors read from left to right. The numbers represent the different options that you can expand into the plot on. And the main dwelling is shown in orange. Additions are shown in pink, and the minor dwelling is in yellow with its garage. A shared garden expands and contracts accordingly, and its use is negotiable. And in this example, which is very typical of perhaps a Georgian house with a coach house at the rear, apart from the kitchens and bathrooms, spaces are not designated. They're all the same size and can be occupied absolutely as anyone desires. So these are slack spaces which allow different kinds of use, and they're not rigidly programmed, allowing people to co-create what they want to do with this dwelling. In this version, for a 4-bed house, it's the Sunday Times Britain's Future Home competition, we were asked to consider a detached, semi-detached and a terrace version of the same dwelling. The proposal makes possible, as you see from this cutaway here, a version with a granny flat that can be separated off, a version with a home office or consultancy that can be accessed independently. The same house can be shared by a household of adults, and it has the potential for splitting the dwelling into 2 smaller flats, so allowing downsizing to take off. The new NPPF, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, and the coalition government's ideas of localism have made much of the potential of custom build, where you buy a design from a developer out of a pattern book and bespoke it to your taste. And also co-housing, where the group of independent people join forces to commission their own development. These are meant to plug the gap left by mainstream developers' failure to meet the current housing crisis. This is really interesting to us as it potentially hands back power over development to the individual or the small group. Anecdotal evidence suggests an appetite to do this amongst certain groups, including older people. But the usual shortages of land and in the right place at the right price, as well as fear and lack of skills about how to go about it, all act as barriers. Most successful schemes have involved someone already knowledgeable in the field of building. Yet a survey commissioned by the Building Societies Association, published in 2011, suggests that 53% of people in the UK would consider building their home were they given the opportunity. Supported by government initiatives such as new legislation which includes improved access to public sector land and finance, this could work if people are organised and are skilled up. There is an opportunity for architects to facilitate this process, helping raise the level of activity from the miserable 7% of housing completions towards 30% that it is in Sweden, or 38% in France. In Austria, the figure is 80%. So here is a co-housing group that are looking to create a new vision for communal housing in the city. It's a Hackney co-housing scheme. So we looked at the items a typical family house owns, but which could potentially be shared. These include washing machines, tools, gardening tools, children's play equipment, cars, bicycles, clothes, veg plots, ladders, barbecues, pets, and so on. By shaving a tiny amount of space off each dwelling, we can make a communal space shared by everyone. The scheme explored 3 different arrangements for organising the dwellings on the site. Crucial issues are how to integrate it with the neighbourhood, whether the communal spaces are at the threshold of the scheme, welcoming neighbours into the community, or at the rear as the focus of community life, or whether family housing should be separate or integrated, with flats for housing singles or older people, or whether a single large space at the rear can express the communal spirit. And in this project, we're addressing housing for the self-builder, and it was a response to a competition which sought a proposal for self-building that would cost no more than £50,000. Since labour is the most expensive item of building, it assumes the owner is the builder except for specialist items such as foundations and groundwork. It avoids use of cranes and only uses specialist trades like electricians to sign off the work once it has been completed. So it uses building techniques that are simple enough for someone without a huge skill base, allowing the space at the rear of the plot to build things on the ground and then lift them up to place, potentially using friends to do so. Projects like this make you think very carefully and laterally about the problems faced by these specific user groups and force the architect to put their feet in the shoes in their shoes and to find an example to their problem which is relevant to their particular issues. So in conclusion, it is said that we get the architecture we deserve. When we abdicate responsibility for the built environment to markets, pension funds, banks, insurance companies, planning, health and safety, and other statutory systems. We allow these to set the agenda and define how everything should be done. I think these forces need calling into account. We have little debate about what kind of built environment we aspire to as a society. I think we need to stimulate this debate, participate in a more democratic planning system, develop the language available to communicate ideas between experts and the public, listen to what non-experts are saying, and carry out research into the effects of the built environment. I think architects can play a key role in this, in mobilizing communities, articulating opinions, showing leadership, fighting for fair access to resources and information, making alliances for greater power of citizens. If we can do this, the future for all of us could look very rosy. There is tons of talent out there, if only we could be ambitious enough to go there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. So I'm just going to ask 2 or 3 questions, then we'll open it up to the room. The first one was in calling for architects to take a more holistic view and to take greater responsibility for the overall process, and also for that process potentially for how buildings are actually used after they're built. And this is a big ask. Do you feel that the profession is ready for that? What are the implications? Does it, for example, mean changes in the way in which architects are educated?
Yeah, of course, yes. So that's what we're trying to do in Sheffield. We've reinvented our course, which is based around communication techniques, what we call live projects, which is working in the field. And we're now approached by lots and lots of organisations, community groups and so forth within the city who want things doing. And they know that they can mobilise a very large and sort of energetic and intelligent group of people. So especially in the latter part of the course, our education system is really based around how do we reinvent the role of the architect to be much, much more focused towards the needs of actually real-life communities. I mean, it could be argued that that's, and it is in a way very much against the common grain that's the model of architectural education hitherto. But I mean, I think it is the future because unless we make this reconnection with society, I just don't see a future for architecture, actually.
But why is it that architects would take on this role rather than, as it were, creating a new profession, or to say, well, actually the critical, pivotal role here is around community engagement and community development, and the architect can be somebody in the team, but so much of what you've said is about community engagement. Shouldn't that be the person, those be the skills which are providing that kind of overseeing role?
Well, I mean, I think there is much, much more of that going on for architects at the moment anyway. And I mean, I think that Sheffield's sort of picking up on a way, but I think that's already, in a way, reflecting what's happening in architectural culture anyway. I mean, there's less and less work for architects, and what's happening is there's a redefinition of what the architect does, and this reconnection with the communities and being community enablers and people who are beginning to forge what the agenda for briefs might be. I mean, maybe within or other organisations, maybe they're commercial organisations as well, is all part of that redefinition of what the role of the architect is. And in a way, I think, my own role as the director of a small architectural practice is in a way on the way out. You know, I don't think there are going to be people like myself exist in the future. I think our role is going to be redefined.
And is it an ethical crisis as well? I mean, does it also go to the heart of the need for architects to have a code of honour, as it were, a behaviour, a set of guidelines which would make it less likely that they would be willing to participate in schemes which don't adhere to the kinds of principles that you've outlined?
Well, I would hope so, but I mean, I think that's a very big ask, and I think, there's always the issue about, trying to make a living, and, I think that's a very, very difficult chestnut. I mean, I would be quite critical of a lot of architecture that is produced in the UK because it's actually driven by money or, it's by greed or whatever it is. And I think it is difficult to resist that, but I do think architects should resist it more. Yeah, I do, yeah.
Turning more to the processes that you've described, what are the difficult trade-offs here? So at one point in your talk, you spoke about the school and about the pupils and the staff being involved in ensuring that the building fitted their own priorities. But then later, you talked about the importance of kind of flexibility. So is there a kind of trade-off there? I mean, so many of the buildings that we like most are buildings which have completely changed their bars that used to be banks or whatever. So is there a challenge about reconciling what users say they need now and want now with the importance of this adaptability?
Of course there is, yes. And I mean, and I think that's a bit of a conundrum, but I think on the whole, it is very difficult to predict what the future's going to be. But I think buildings that are well built, that have a bit of slack, that are quality places that communities love, on the whole, are going to be more resilient because then they're cared for, they're cherished, people look after them, they see them as symbols of their community, and they are places which will then endure because they enter the symbolic life of that community. And to that extent, I mean, I think, I think they will find ways of being adapted and being flexible in the future. I think that just goes without saying, and we have plenty of examples of how that's been done in the past to buildings which we couldn't possibly have imagined would take on a new life through being converted into something else. So, in a way, I don't think there is a difficulty about that.
And then a final question before we open it up. I sense that, I mean, we tend to have a discourse about population aging, which sees it as a problem. People still use terrible phrases like demographic time bomb and these kinds of things. My sense from your talk is that you see responding to population aging actually as a humanistic, that it provides a kind of humanistic opportunity, that as we start to think about the kinds of places that older people want to live, knowing that we ourselves will be, there's no problem about empathy here because it's an experience we're all going to have, that do you think this might propel a more humanistic turn in architecture because we're going to have to think very hard about the kinds of dwellings which are going to work for all of us when we're older?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a fantastic thing if we did that.
And have you found that in your work? You found that getting architects to think more deeply about the kinds of spaces that will work for older people, is that a good discipline in terms of?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult to get people to project their minds that far forward. And I mean, I've only really got interested in that area of architecture since my own parents' demise and sort of seeing the problems that they went through. And I think we do tend to sort of blank it out, but I have sort of come to the conclusion through the project in Sheffield that if we could only make it work for older people, then it would also work for younger people. So if we could only get that right, then, we'd look back through the other end of the telescope and see a beautiful world awaiting us, which is more humanistic. But I mean, I think, what I was trying to say also is I think that the conundrum about, to stay or to go, to stick or to move, is still going to be present. And I think, I don't want to dictate what happens to people. I think the thing is about giving people options so that they can make their own mind up at the right time. I mean, I would argue it has to be done at the right time, and it has to be done before you get into crisis, definitely. But, at the moment, I'm really arguing that there isn't enough choice for people at the moment, and it's going to get worse as people's, incomes reduce, the care budget goes up, and the availability of land becomes increasingly difficult, and so on.
500,000 people living in care homes and residential nursing homes in England alone, which is an amazing number of people living in a form of residence, which, although, at its best can be good, is not one that most people want. And not one that most people choose because they have a range of options, but they choose because it's the only option.
Absolutely, that's the point, yeah.
Good, okay, so let's take some questions from the floor. We've got kind of 20 minutes or so. Don't be shy. You must have something to ask. You must be, very good. Just wait for the microphone to come. Thank you very much. And if you could tell us your name, that would be great.
Kaniash Sakula. Tell us all about the disobedience and where you found that crucial.
Okay, well, I call it that because I suppose really at the bottom of it, I want people to be more disobedient. I want them to be more demanding and ask more difficult questions. I want them to behave badly in architecture. I want them to, use it as something which is a very creative platform in which they can express themselves. I think on the whole, architecture is something which people feel quite cowed by. And I mean, here we are in this amazing hall. I mean, this is an institution, and don't you know it? So it conveys all these messages to you to behave in a particular kind of way. And what I'm really arguing for is an architecture which invites people to be inventive and, in a way, disobedient with the conventions which they understand architecture to convey. Because I think that kind of creative occupation is what makes life really interesting.
But I've heard people say that kind of courage, that kind of disobedience, as you put it, is hard to reconcile with community engagement, because community engagement can lead to a kind of blandness, because initially at least the community doesn't want wild and wacky and unusual and disobedient ideas. They'd start from a relatively conventional. Is that completely wrong as a way
I don't think that's completely wrong, but I think one of the roles of the architect is to tease out things, as I tried to say, that people don't necessarily know they want. And that's the problem, is that, unless you can engage them in a dialogue and raise the stakes about what is possible for them, I mean, in a way, it's a bit like examining the subconscious of a community. You're trying to sort of get at what makes this place tick and what will get these people going. And that's the kind of creative aspect of the engagement. I mean, of course, community engagement can lead to bad architecture, but I'm not arguing for bad architecture. I'm arguing for really ambitious architecture that, encourages people to be disobedient. Because I just think life's richer that way.
That makes me want to ask more questions, but yes, very good. Just wait for the mic to come.
I found it very refreshing, the collaboration that was done at the design stage with those children and teachers in the school. What's also critical is getting feedback from the end user after the project's completed.
Yeah.
Is that part of your process? And to what extent is this generally so amongst the architectural community? Or if you are doing it, are you in the minority?
And it's particularly, I think, an issue, by the way, around environmental issues, where very often these buildings go up with brilliant environmental standards, and 5 years later you go back to them and actually the way they're being used, it doesn't conform at all with the,
Sorry, I didn't hear the very end of your question, but I hope I'm going to answer it anyway. Of course, we don't do it, because who's going to fund it, When we're interested in what happens, and we talk to our clients and we talk to our users and we go back and we love the buildings and we photograph them, and then that's it. And what we hear about is all the problems. Sometimes we get somebody say, "Oh, that's really lovely," and we have had buildings where someone's gone from being Ofsted satisfactory to Ofsted excellent, outstanding or whatever, which is great, and you think, yeah, we've really achieved something there. But we've also had buildings where, you get a call and something's not working and nobody knows what to do and there's no aftercare, and you know what, the contractor went bust and they went into dispute with their subcontractors, so now they're not talking to one another, so nobody knows what went on, and and it all lands in the architect's plate. And we have to sort that out, and it's very,
couldn't this just become part of professional practice? I mean,
yes, it should do.
Lawyers and others are expected every few years to refresh their skills. Couldn't it just become
all that?
Yeah, of course you do all that, but could you perhaps add to that the expectation that architects should, as a matter of course, always go back to buildings 5 or 10 years after they've built and have to write something about it, talk to people?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
embed it in
arguing
practice?
About the research. But I think the question is who's going to pay, because who pays doesn't necessarily benefit again. And, without going into the thorny problem of fee bidding and, reduced fees, I think it's really a lot to expect that the that gets done. I mean, so the question is who pays and who benefits, and I think there have been some government-funded research into those areas, funding to look at post-occupancy evaluation, evaluation of environmental controls following the completion of buildings, those kinds of things, but they're really patchy, and the evidence base is very difficult to cross-compare. So actually, it's not very meaningful at the moment, and I think it would be better if it were, there were established a real platform for making those comparisons. But then you've got commercial confidentiality, you've got people who don't want to tell you about the problems that happen. There are huge barriers.
Perhaps we just need a website called My Building's 5 Years Old, in which people can put onto it their own experiences, and then
anonymous.
That's the way to do it.
There needs to be a wiki thing, where people can, put stuff up there without sort of, getting into trouble. Let's put it that way. But there could be platforms that begin to do that. Yeah. But it's hard work. It's really interesting, but it's hard work. Very, very complex.
Who's next with a question? Oh, great. Suddenly got four.
Golly,
fantastic.
flood.
So we'll take one here. Yep.
Hello.
okay.
James Burrell. You spoke initially about architects' wages or salaries falling. How do you propose to address that? Is it to make architects more relevant to society? Because we seem to be becoming less and less relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on to that one, and we'll take another couple, if that's okay. I think there was a gentleman over. No. Oh, it's a lady over there. Yeah.
Hello, Teresa Green. I was just wondering if you've pulled any research from environmental psychology in terms of place attachment, place identity, and whether that's influenced any of your designs.
I couldn't hear that at all.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Could you shout?
Yeah. I'm just wondering if you've looked at environmental psychology and looked at any place attachment, place identity, and if any of that has influenced any of your designs.
Environmental psychology and place identity, is that something which has influenced your work, body of work that you're aware of? And then also this question about how can you make sure architects are better paid? That's a simple challenge for you.
I'm going to pay them all a lot of money. No, I mean, yeah, of course, that's the big one, isn't it? Well, I would hope that if we make this new contract with society, that our wages will go up because, will be considered of greater value. But I mean, I think we've got to earn it, at the same time. We've got to do a better job. And I think we've got to stop the absurd fee bidding that goes on, But it's really very complex. I mean, I don't have the answer to it. We compete on fees all the time, and we try and do a really good job out of very little, and put a huge amount of effort into it. So I don't have a panacea. I mean, I think it's a general cultural thing, and we need to make sure that it drifts upwards.
But professionalism is, in a way, supposed to be the answer to that kind of problem. It's supposed to provide the kind of ethos which protects people from a kind of lowest common denominator, cheapest bidder, rush to the bottom. And you're saying it's not really providing that function at the moment in architecture.
It is. Professionalism is. I mean, I think our profession doesn't guarantee that, obviously. So it's the way we behave that needs to change, which is really what I'm arguing. That I think we need to demonstrate our value to society much, much more. And we need to stop whinging and sort of get out there and do it for ourselves, because nobody is going to do it for us.
And this point about environmental psychology and place?
I don't really know anything about environmental psychology.
Right, I think, Teresa, will you come up and talk to Sarah at the end and explain that body?
I mean, I know what it is. I haven't looked at it, and I've never studied it. But I mean, of course, you're thinking about it. You're thinking about what you're doing and what the results of what you're doing as a designer are all the time.
We found in some work we did with the Heritage Lottery Fund that a lot of local authorities, for example, talk about place shaping. But when you ask them what they mean by place, it all becomes quite amorphous quite quickly. And it seemed to us that was partly to do with not wanting to talk about identity, which feels like quite a kind of difficult issue for people.
Yeah.
I mean, a kind of phrase that people use quite a lot, which has kind of replaced the phrase "I'm not racist, but" actually as a kind of preempt. It's people say, things have changed around here, which is a kind of way of saying there's a lot of new people coming in, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Now, actually, you know, places are changing, and our sense was that people, local authorities, didn't really want to wrestle with issues of identity because it felt too politically problematic. But if you don't talk about identity, it's hard to talk about place, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, identity is not just about race relations.
No, of course it's not. No.
All sorts of things. But yeah, I think it's absolutely...
But it's contested identity.
Oh yeah, but I mean, that's what makes it interesting, is that, you know, it's about bringing these ingredients together and seeing what you bake. Very good.
There was a couple more questions. Yeah. Two in the front row. Is this a Twitter question?
Yeah.
Oh, I love Twitter questions. They're very short.
Oh no.
So the question is, if we are to build places loved by communities, do we have to find ways where the community directly commissions the project?
Where the community can?
Directly commissions the project, as opposed to developers or other intermediary bodies doing that.
I think that was very much the thrust of your talk, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to that is yes. that basically was the talk. Not that I'm criticising whoever it was who sent that question in, but yep. Yes.
Hi, Sarah. Jane Brigginshaw. I love the idea of a contract with society, and I couldn't disagree with that, and disobedience is fantastic. And if it goes by community building, that's also fantastic. But I'm wondering how you look at the wider society, as you suggested, and asking about the moves that are being made in politics. So this government is one thing. The Lions Review of Housing has talked about a lot of devolution of power to communities and so on and so forth. And I wonder if you think that's going to achieve very much, the devolution to communities, and what the architect's role in that might be. And then is the more radical ways of doing it? Because it seems to me if design is about people, then we undervalue people at the moment, and so we naturally undervalue design. So there's a bigger project behind what you're talking about, and so how do we tackle the politics of it? Yeah. That's the question.
Well, if I had the answer, Jane, I think I'd be a millionaire. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think one of the first things to say is that I'm really interested in trying to develop, you know, a platform for debate which we can engage the public in, and it might be the newspapers. You know, it might be magazines, it might be Twitter, it might be whatever, you know, all out there, including this talk, hopefully. I think we need to be able to get ideas across and engage with the general public. I mean, I think, you know, as an architect, I trawl through the Sunday papers and I look at all the pages and pages and pages of books, book reviews, books, more books and more books. And then there's a bit on film, maybe, but you know, there's very, very little talked about the one art form we can't avoid, which is the built environment. I don't understand that. I think it's absolutely weird, and I can only put it down to, you know, what Walter Benjamin said, which is that we experience the built environment as a state of distraction. It's just there, so we don't even notice it. But actually, why is that? You know, why aren't we demanding more about that? Absolutely we don't. So I think that is a societal project, yes, and it would be absolutely fantastic if we could really begin to raise that level of discourse so that we do start to make changes and value people, which values their place, blah, 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 and everything will kind of snowball from there. So, I mean, I don't have a panacea about how to do it. I'm raising it as an issue because I think it's a really big issue. And unless we think about ways of tackling that, I think we are kind of lost, really, when we just do hand it over to the insurance companies or whoever it is that is controlling all the development. And, you know, it's not the planners. It's not the planners. I mean, they've been decimated by the government. And even localism, you know, goes hand in hand with a kind of centralization of power. So although you may think what I'm talking about is localism, I mean, it could be if only it were funded properly, people actually took communities seriously, etc., etc. They don't do that. So, you know, actually it's a real grassroots revolution that needs to happen. So there's that. And I've forgotten the second bit of your question.
No, we're all kind of just... if you've gone on much longer, you've got a standing ovation, I think. Maybe your kind of uber metric should be that when the public is surveyed and they're asked, is architecture about people or buildings? That I suspect at the moment they'd say buildings, and then perhaps we need a world where they'd say no people.
Well, I mean, it is, and that's why, you know, most of the discourse about buildings is about Zaha and, you know, the great symbols of kind of pumped up sort of icons, which discussed in terms of style or appearance or blah, blah, blah.
Or their resemblance to items you'd find in the kitchen. It's the
Yes,
seems to be a big
exactly.
thing.
All of that. I mean, like a product or something. And actually, it's not what's interesting about architecture. It's not interesting at all. And you might have noticed I haven't talked about style or appearance or aesthetics at all in this lecture because I'm not interested in that. That's not really what it's about. I mean, it may be that, as a byproduct, you're hoping to sort of have some kind of poetic, aesthetic resonance with people, but I certainly don't subscribe to Le Corbusier's view that, if we have an aesthetic revolution, we have a societal revolution. I think that's absolutely absurd and naive. It's got to come from the grassroots up, and people have got to learn to be more demanding and call people to account.
Do you know what? That is just such a good way to end, isn't it? Really? I mean, I'm sure there may be other questions, but I feel, Sarah, you're getting to such a point that, and I think you've probably got a cold as well. I'm slightly worried that. It has been a revolutionary talk and a revolutionary conversation. I think you have absolutely inspired people, Sarah, and I think it's important to say that Sarah's talk and your brilliant questions will be on the website, so do share them with other people. Tweet it, get it out there, get the conversation going, and perhaps we can return to it at some time. I'm sure we will return to it. So thank you very much, Sarah. As I said, there's an invitation for you to continue this conversation, to take the revolution to the next step. Perhaps we just need to get downstairs and organise. And nicely, it'll be over a glass of wine, which is, I think, always best when one's organising to have a nice glass of wine. So that's taking place downstairs. Thanks again to the Boston family for their generous support for this event and for that reception. Thank you for your fantastic questions, but most of all, thank you to our terrific speaker, Sarah Wigglesworth.